Hello guys, JBread here. After over 1,000 hours of CK3, I think I finally found the most bizarre mod I've ever played. This one is called Elf Destiny, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It adds elves into Crusader Kings 3. But that's not the strange part. It doesn't just add them, it completely reshapes Western Europe's history and lore into something entirely different. And let's get into it. So after installing the mod, you'll notice something new in the main menu DLC panel, the mod's description. Clicking it reveals the full concept behind Elf Destiny. Let's read it to get its most essential concept. At the beginning of civilization, elves and humans came to this world through a portal from another realm. Since then, countless elf and human empires have risen and fallen, now lost to time. Elves have faded to the edges of the world and memory. You're the new elf lord, and your goal is to restore the greatness of the elves. What will these new elven people be like, and how will they get along with humans? Those answers are for you to decide. Getting straight into the game, not much has changed at first glance, but there is one major addition, a custom search option called Find Elves. Clicking it opens a new tab similar to the courtier search. On the left, you get trait filters, letting you narrow down exactly what kind of elf or even non-elf you're looking for. And the mod goes surprisingly deep here, with different elven bloodlines, tiers, and more. On the right are the actual characters, and yes, there are already elves in the game, though they are rare enough that this tool is basically necessary to find them initially. We'll get into why that matters later. To start the mod, you are given a new decision to take titled What's an Archaeologist? Clicking it opens you to a tab, and its description reads as, your steward approaches you, a concerned look on their face. My lord, an odd woman has arrived seeking an audience with you. She calls herself Julia Melwood. She claims that she is a trained archaeologist, but I'm fairly sure that she's made that title up. You both glance over as the self-proclaimed expert knocks over a vase. Your steward shakes their head and continues. She has apparently found a great discovery relating to the elves. As far as I'm concerned, they're nothing more than a children's fairy tale. But seeing as how insistent she was, I thought it was best to bring her to you. What should I tell her? I would know the truth of this. See her in. Clicking the only option, we are introduced to Julia, an eccentric and peculiar woman, and we see in her panel entitled Expedition to the Elven Ruins. Reading it, the young woman walks up to you as your steward waves her over. My lord, I am Julia Melwood, one of the best archaeologists in my field. If I may be so bold, you spare her a glance over to your steward, who looks clearly unimpressed. She rolls a parchment on the table and lays it flat. You notice strange script lining the borders, perhaps some dialect of Arabic. I strive to discover clues our ancestors left behind, and my specialty is the study of the mysterious elven people. The few artifacts found tell us that they were a highly advanced civilization, perhaps more so than ours, and seems to have survived for hundreds or perhaps even thousands of years. This map is covered in an elven script that I can't decipher, but it appears to have shown several possible locations of the fortress tomb of the last elf emperor. If real, it may contain great treasures forgotten to time. I would mount an expedition to investigate, but I'm in need of funding to supply such a journey. Will you help me? Going through with a quest line unlocks a new activity called the Expedition, which lets you travel across different locations tied to the mod's lore. Now, I won't go too deep into what happens during your expedition, because honestly, this is one of those mods that's actually worth experiencing for yourself. But I will say this is where things start to get really bizarre. You eventually become an elf, and with that comes the usual trade-offs you'd expect: increased lifespan and stronger skills, but at the cost of fertility. Very much in line with classic fantasy elves. But the fact that this even happens in a CK3 campaign already makes it feel like you're playing something completely different. From there, the gameplay loop really opens up And again, this is where it barely feels like standard Crusader Kings 3 anymore. Instead of focusing on vassals, wars, and successions, you're traveling across the world, visiting elven ruins, solving riddles, playing chess-like encounters, undergoing trials, and even interacting with gods, all while collecting powerful artifacts and unlocking unique elven traditions. As you progress, you also take on a larger role within the system. You essentially become a sort of de facto leader of the elven religion, working alongside priestesses to restore holy sites and eventually reform the faith. And again, this is a pretty much massive shift from what Crusader Kings 3 usually asks you to do. There's also a long-term objective of rebuilding the portal you originally came through, but as of now, that part of the mod is still incomplete, so the late game content is a bit limited. What's interesting though is that despite how deep the elven lore gets, it almost exists separately from the rest of the medieval world. It feels like you're playing a completely different layer of the game running alongside normal Crusader Kings 3 rather than something fully integrated into it. But overall, despite the gaps, it's genuinely an interesting experience and definitely one of the most bizarre ways you can play Crusader Kings 3. This mod also explores the darker side of what it means for a species to live for so long. One of the elves' tradition you can unlock is called the Rut, and reading its description gives you a pretty clear idea of what the mod is going for here. It implies a form of seasonal, instinct-driven coupling behavior among elves, where intimacy and reproduction are heavily tied to biological cycles rather than normal social relationships. In practice, it creates the idea of elves as something far more animalistic in their underlying instinct than you'd usually expect from a typical fantasy setting. And even beyond that, the mod seems to lean into something intentionally uncomfortable themes. There's even a planned activity called the Feast of the White Bunny, and while it's unfinished, the imagery alone already hints at the kind of direction this mod is taking. It also goes further into the themes of control and manipulation. Some mechanics involve dominating other characters' will, effectively turning them into a puppet. And what's interesting is that the mod doesn't present this as a clean or simply power fantasy. You can actually see resistance, but instead of breaking free, it often pushes the target further into that controlled state. Another recurring theme is the elven obsession with beauty. One of the artifacts you can find in these dungeons is Nefertiti's bracelet, which lets you drain beauty from other characters, making them physically uglier while enhancing your own appearance. But it's not purely one-sided. If you lose control of it, you can get possessed yourself by the goddess of beauty, Nefertiti, turning it into more of a curse than a reward. What stood out to me most though isn't any single mechanic, it's the overall tone. Even outside of gameplay systems, the art and presentation give off this consistent feeling of unease. It's not the clean, heroic fantasy you'd expect from most Crusader Kings 3 mods. It feels closer to a fairy tale horror, where everything looks magical on the surface, but something underneath is fundamentally wrong. And that's really where this mod separates itself. This isn't Elder Scrolls styles elves, or Witcher inspired elves, or even Tolkien's interpretation of them, even though you can clearly see some inspiration from these worlds, especially things like portals, exile narratives, and the idea of leaving the mortal world. The execution here is very different. In Tolkien, leaving the world is a kind of peaceful departure. In this mod, it feels more like an escape from something unresolved. And in most fairytale settings, elves are either noble, tragic, or mystical. Here, there's something far more unsettling and morally ambiguous. So overall, I don't think that this is just a good or bad mod. It's a mod that actively makes you uncomfortable in places, intentionally or not. And that's what makes it stand out. For me, as someone who's played Crusader Kings 2 and Crusader Kings 3 for a long time, this is one of the few mods that I actually felt that impression. Enough for me to confidently call it one of the most bizarre Crusader Kings 3 mods I've ever played. Not in a purely negative way, but in a way that just makes the entire experience feel off in a memorable way. And honestly, if you're into Crusader Kings 3 mods, it's still worth checking out for yourself. And that's for today's video, guys. Stay tuned next week. I should have the calculations ready for my math series on buildings and then moving into men at arms. Peace and God bless.